Hello and welcome. Today's topic, my healer wishlist. Now I enjoy playing healer quite a lot, but much more during new content drop when I actually have to heal in content. I also enjoy healing a lot more back in Stormblood. Now, I have little to no complaints about the healing kits of all four healers. Maybe White Mage could use an extra party mid, but otherwise they all seem fine to me. The real and primary issue is that healer damage rotations have gotten too easy and boring. One damage over time and one spammy damage button for the most part. And I think that the simplicity of healer DPS rotation has already been discussed to the death by the community. And I think many players would agree that it's especially mind-numbing in easier content. Now, I do to a point understand CBU3's thinking. When it comes to particularly savage and higher difficulty content, there is a shortage of healers because players see the role as just overwhelming. Keeping the DPS rotation simple makes it much easier for players to switch, enter, and play the healer role in difficult content. It also gives newer players an easier entry into the healing role in more casual content. The downside to the current design is that the simple DPS rotation also puts off vets from continuing to play healer, because the simple rotation is just way too boring once players learn the mechs of a newer fight in the space of 1 to 2 weeks. So what does this all mean? Basically, no matter what CBU3 does, there will probably be a continuous shortage of healers, especially for higher-end duties. So the question then is obviously whether it's worth making healer DPS rotation a bit more interesting. Personally, I say definitely yes. In my opinion, the main priority of a game should always be first and foremost fun. I get the whole thing about making DPSing on healers easy, so players don't feel overstressed stepping their foot into slightly more challenging content on the healer. But once again, players need to be able to have fun on healer in casual content. That is, in my opinion, the most important part of the game, having fun. So how about a compromise, right? Some healers, I think, can remain simple, while others can have a more interesting DPS rotation or gameplay elements. I think that makes perfect sense, right? Some DPS jobs have more complicated rotations, some DPS jobs have easier rotations. Why can't this be applied to healer damage rotations as well? At least that's my thinking. So let's get into my wish list on the 4 healers based on this line of thought. For White Mage, I'm more than happy for it to remain similar, if not near identical, to how it currently is. White Mage should serve as a newer player's entry into healing, so its DPS rotation should remain similar to how it is now, easy and straightforward. What I do know is that White Mage has a weakness in mitigation compared to Astro, the other peer healer. Every 60 seconds, an Astro is able to provide party mitigation through collective unconscious, as well as neutral sec shields every 2 minutes. White Mage can only provide party mitigations every 2 minutes through Temperance. Now this usually isn't a problem until you happen to be paired with a dodgy shield healer, usually a Sage. Now as an aside, most players who main DPS, they like to use Sage when they heal, because Sage feels more like a DPS, so a lot of Sage players aren't really healers. Forgive me for saying this. So anyway, these DPS players jump on Sage when they want quick kills and don't want to wait in duty or party finder. So as a result, if you're a White Mage, sometimes you can get paired with a Sage who doesn't mid properly, and you will end up with a situation where a ranged DPS or caster DPS, these two DPS have slightly lower defenses, being taken down from 100% health to 0 in raids from a hard-hitting AoE. An Astro will be able to prevent this, but a white mage won't be able to. And the thing is, this has happened to me often enough when I use white mage, that when I see that a shield healer slot in Party Finder is filled with a sage, I basically play it safe and don't use white mage. Once again, I apologize, especially if you happen to be one of the proper sages who do bother to mitigate stuff. But, you know, when you use white mage enough and you've been burned a few times, seen range DPS and caster DPS get 100 health to 0 from a raid wide because a sage couldn't be bothered to apply mid, you sort of start realizing that a lot of sages are actually DPS players who just want a quick kill. Anyway, back to what I would love to see on a white mage. What I'm thinking is this: maybe white mage can get a new ability, a skill that uses one lily to give the party a 5% mid that lasts 5 seconds. If damage is taken by the party during these 5 seconds, the white mage will generate 2 blood lilies. So basically, if as a white mage you use this skill well, you'll be able to generate more Afflatus miseries, which to my understanding, white mage love using. Even I'm not a white mage main and I love using Afflatus misery. Okay, so onto Scholar. As mentioned before, I am primarily a Scholar player, so I will spend a bit more time discussing my wish for a revamped Scholar damage rotation. So here's my wish. Currently Scholar DPS buttons are these. You have Biolysis, an 80 potency over 30 second damage over time ability. You have Broil 4, 320 potency with a 2.5 second recast. You have Rune 2 for mobility, 220 potency, instant cast. You have Energy Drain, 100 potency and increases Fairy Gauge by 10. So here's my proposed changes. Biolysis, 80 potency, damage over time, over 45 seconds. Broil 4, 320 potency normally, but that increases to 380 potency if the target is afflicted by Biolysis, and removes 3 seconds of Biolysis on hit. And obviously Broil 4 has a 2.5 second recast. Then you have Rune 2, 220 potency, adds 3 seconds of Biolysis on hit. You have Energy Drain, 100 potency, increases Fairy Gauge by 10, but now it also adds 9 seconds of Biolysis on hit, assuming the dot is active on target. And now I want to add a new skill, Broil 5. Now this Broil 5 second cast, 700 potency normally, 800 potency if target is afflicted with Biolysis. And Broil 5 removes 6 seconds of Biolysis on hit. Now I introduced Broil 5 because I like the idea of having an attack that requires fight knowledge and planning. So you can plan your character and perform the long and slightly harder hitting cast that is Broil 5. Also, something to note, my idea is for Broil 4 and Broil 5 to be able to hit with full potency on the target as long as there's 1 second of Biolysis remaining on the target. So this creates an interesting gameplay where the player needs to manipulate the dot timer so that you can get one final hit in before Biolysis wears off. If you're a Scholar main, like me, do you think this is a far more interesting DPS rotation, but still keeps it pretty simple? I think it is. As a Scholar, I've always loved dot gameplay, and introducing the idea of certain skills extending dots, having extra potency if there's a dot on the target, certain skills decreasing the dot timer, all this stuff feels super fun to me, and it's all under a pretty simple gimmick. Okay, so on to Astro. I prefer if it kept the simple 1 button dot and 1 button damage rotation. With Astro, I think its gameplay should be more focused on an interesting card system. The current card system is only relevant during the 2-minute burst window for the most part, So I believe what Astro really needs is an extra card system that plays a role outside of the 2-minute burst window. Now you might say, but with Astro cards, only the damage cards matter. This is something that we've known since Heavensward. And you are absolutely correct in saying this. But let me ask you this question. Since Heavensward, have different jobs not been given various different ways to store and deal damage? And the answer to that is yes. Monk, for example, has a conditional charging system. If a monk crits an attack, they get a chakra charge. Once 5 chakras are collected, they can unleash an attack with it. A ninja's Aeolian Edge uses a save blade generated by Armor Crush, and Armor Crush generates 3 blades every time it's used. Ninjas also have a spender gauge. There are also many other classes such as warriors, samurais, that also use a spender gauge. Black Mage instead has a charge system on a timer. Every 30 seconds, a Black Mage will generate a charge of Polyglot that can be used for different skills. Then, you have the special gauge, such as the gauge for Reaper's Shroud on Reaper, and Reawaken on Viper. So why am I talking about all these mechanics? I think it would be really interesting if Astro got a secondary card system that plays a role outside of 2-minute burst windows. So let's say this secondary card system uses a spade, a club, a heart, and a diamond. A spade card would remove the conditional DPS requirements for 15 seconds. So if a monk gets hit with a spade card, the monk would generate chakra with every attack, even without critting the attack. A ninja will get the bonus Aeolian Edge damage without using up or needing a save blade from Armor Crush. Okay, so club, what will club do? Generate spender gauge by 100 over 10 seconds. If a warrior receives a club from an Astro, that warrior will get to use 2 extra fell cleaves if they react quickly to the buff from the Astro. How about heart? The heart card can accelerate recharge skills by 6 times over 10 seconds. So basically, if a Black Mage receives a heart card, instead of taking 30 seconds to generate a Polyglot, a Black Mage would charge a Polyglot in 5 seconds. A bard would also recharge skills such as, the Heartbreak Shot and Reign of Death much faster. A machinist maybe could recharge Double Check and Checkmate faster if they receive the Heart card. Okay, Diamond card increases special gauge by 50 over 10 seconds. So if a Reaper or Viper, or potentially other classes, receives this Diamond card, a Reaper will basically get to go into an extra Shroud window, and a Viper will get an extra Reawaken window. Look, I will not deny that this might potentially create imbalances in the game, but once again I'm talking about fun here. Astro, if they can throw out these RNG cards that require extensive knowledge of how every class does damage, let's say maybe a card every 10 seconds outside of a 2-minute window, this would make Astro as a class much more engaging and fun outside of burst windows. And any player who receives these cards from Astro will also have a lot of fun having to adjust their rotations based on what they receive from an Astro on the fly. Okay, so on to Sage. What I'm about to suggest for Sage might be controversial, but I want to change Sage so that its damage comes primarily from OGCDs instead of GCDs, and its healing will primarily come from GCDs instead. Yes, I know, I probably said something that sounds crazy, but I think that's the fun of Sage gameplay. It's because of how speedy and rapid it feels. And so turning it into a healer that uses a lot of OGCDs to deal damage will definitely create that rapid fire feeling even better. I also want to point out that in Final Fantasy XIV, the healer gameplay loop has become primarily, get as much healing done through your OGCD heal abilities, and then spend all GCDs on damage buttons. So for me, changing and positioning Sage, the rapid fire healer, to have an OGCD damage profile is perfect for the class. And this will provide players with a truly different and unique playstyle. And once again, I say this because weaving OGCDs has the effect of that rapid fire healing. Okay, so let's get into the abilities. Here's my wish for Sage. Its current damage abilities are these. You have Doses 3, a 380 potency GCD. You have Toxicon 2, 380 potency GCD. You have Recreation Doses 3, a damage over time 80 potency, 30 seconds. And you have Phlegma, 600 potency with AoE drop off, 40 seconds recharge, and it's a GCD. You have Pneuma, 380 potency, 120 second recast, GCD. You have Psych, 600 potency, 60 seconds recast, OGCD. And this isn't a damage button, but I have to include it for purposes that you understand later. Soteria increases cure potency of Cardian by 70%, duration 15 seconds. Well, here are the changes. Doses 3. We lower that potency to 100 potency, it keeps being a GCD. Toxicon 2, we lower that to 100 potency as well, we keep that as a GCD. Recreation Doses 3, we keep it the same, damage over time 80 potency, last 30 seconds GCD. Here's where the changes. Phlegma, 600 potency with AoE drop off. We reduce the recharge timer to 10 seconds, and Phlegma becomes an OGCD, right? Phlegma becomes an OGCD. Pneuma, we keep it the same, 380 potency, 120 second recast GCD. Psych, this is the other skill I want to change. 600 potency, it has a 1 second recast OGCD and now requires charges. And it can save a maximum up to 2 charges. Okay, so how are Psych charges generated? 50% chance to generate a charge if the target with the Sage Link Cardia receives damage. Alright, so 50-second chance to generate a charge of Psych, which has been changed to an OGCD, if the target, which is probably the main tank, with Cardia, receives damage from any source. Okay, so Soteria. It still has the increased cure potency of Cardian by 70%, but now it also generates 1 charge of Psych every 3 seconds on use, and it lasts 15 seconds. And the cooldown of this skill is 120 seconds. So this is to ensure that Sage damage is consistent during 2-minute burst windows. Okay, so basically, if a main tank with a Sage Link Cardia gets hit by a few quick auto attacks, or maybe suffers damage from a dot and also suffers, damage from a boss auto attack at the same time, it's possible that a Sage will overcap on Psych charges. Remember, the maximum Psych charges is 2. So this places a Sage player in a position where it might often be better to heal with a GCD and then double weave Psych and Phlegma. Reminder, Phlegma has been changed to an OGCD. And this also forces a Sage player to try to use up their Psych charges as often as possible, which leads to, a Sage player having to use GCD heals so that they can get rid of that Psych charge. So as a playstyle, damage and healing profile, this would be truly unique, and the Sage will most certainly feel super rapid fire, which is, to my understanding, why players love it. So what do you all think of these changes? Comment below. Will CBU3 actually make healer damage more interesting in the future? Who knows? Will CBU3 ever give us a heal that primarily does damage through OGCD and heals instead from GCDs, a playstyle that is unique and different from the current healing meta gameplay? I have no idea. Will Astro ever get cards that interact with different job mechanics instead of the current boring percentage damage boost? One can dream. But, well, what I'll say is this. These ideas might introduce imbalances, but for me, as a player, games are about having fun. I can't speak for you all, but personally, I will always be willing to accept a little bit of imbalance if that comes with benefit of more unique gameplay style and fun. Yoshi P has stated CBU3 plans to have more unique class identity in 8.0 expansion. I personally certainly hope that this will apply to healer damage rotations as well. So thanks for watching, like, comment and subscribe, and have fun in the world of Final Fantasy XIV.